everyone. Welcome to Proven Strategies for Cloud Migration Success. Thank you so much for tuning in to join us here today. My name is Emma Jordan, and I am a marketing manager at staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment, who is the founder and sponsor of Tech in Motion Events, our international tech event series. For those of you who might be attending today for the very first time, Tech in Motion is a community-driven event series with the goal of bringing together the tech community from all over to share ideas and inspire one another. Today's topic, I don't have to tell you, but it's one of increasing importance, as 80% of enterprises will put a mechanism in place to shift to cloud-centric infrastructure and applications twice as fast as before the pandemic. As the workforce has shifted in so many ways and remote work has really taken over, and of course, with next generation technologies like edge computing and artificial intelligence becoming a reality, the need for cloud infrastructure has become critical. We are so excited to get into this talk today and hear insights and perspectives from our expert panel on this topic. So with that, I want to just quickly go over a few housekeeping items, and then we'll go ahead and turn it over to our moderator to get things kicked off. So first, you'll notice that you've all joined this webinar in listen-only mode today. Feel free to submit any questions and comments during the panel, and we'll do our very best to address them during the live event or at the Q&A session at the end. Last but not least, don't forget to follow us on social, where you can be in the know of all of our upcoming events and opportunities. We have tons of different ways to get involved, not only joining and attending event, but also speaking at events. We also have our Timmy Awards coming up soon, where you can learn more information on what that means. But follow along here and you'll be up to date on all of these wonderful things. Okay, so now on to our webinar. I would love to introduce you to our moderator, Mandy Walls. She is a DevOps advocate at PagerDuty. For PagerDuty, she helps organizations along their IT modernization journey. Prior to PagerDuty, she worked at Chef Software and AOL. She is an international speaker on DevOps topics and the author of the white paper, Building a DevOps Culture, published by O'Reilly. Mandy, we're so excited to have you. I will let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma. It's great to be here today. Let's introduce the rest of our panel. Let's start with Brianna Frank. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I am the director of product in IBM Cloud. And in my portfolio, I create products in the developer services area. So we're all about Kubernetes and serverless and observability tools, dev tools, just making it easier to innovate faster.
Excellent. Next up, Mark Weaver. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm originally from Cambridge in the UK, but I'm now based in Miami in the States. I have 20 years of experience in IT. Initially, I was an IT consultant in investment banking in London, Sydney, and New York. But for the last 6 years, I've been running my own business, which focuses on cloud computing with an emphasis on AWS.
Excellent. And Phil?
Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Wise, Senior Manager of Engineering and DevOps at Echo Global Logistics. What we do is a lot of different things. We use Kubernetes, Chef, lots of automation with Terraform, things like that in order to enable our cloud technology.
Excellent. So we have a lot of experience on our panel today. So if you do have any questions for the panelists, make sure you use the Q&A panel. And we'll just get started. Let's start with some your thoughts on the state of the cloud in 2021. Like, we know that the past year has been a bit of an acceleration and maybe a pull forward in some parts of that technology. But what else are you seeing? What does the cloud landscape look like for you in 2021? Let's start with Brianna.
Oh, what a great question. I mean, I think that it's busy. I think no one in tech has had a slow year. We've been, all glued to our, respective Zoom, WebEx, whatever flavor of web conferencing that you use. And the reason for that is that, client adoption of cloud has soared because of COVID. And, that makes sense. There's a lot of, precautions about, going into a physical data center and actually, managing it. And it's been interesting to see how different companies have really pivoted their strategies. And it's a lot of innovation has happened. I mean, a lot of innovation. And some of the things I've seen is innovation at the edge, where we're using, video analytics to see if, someone's wearing a mask or not, and help warn them that, maybe their mask is slipped down, or using thermal devices to take temperatures. And, it's fascinating because this is exactly what cloud native is all about. It's about pivoting really fast and really having to, handle whatever comes your way. And sometimes that could be a competitive threat. But in this case, it was a global pandemic, and being able to adapt and keep people safe is really interesting. Just maybe looking at a hospital, maybe a waiting room, and using video analytics to see who's been in that hospital waiting room, when does it need to be sanitized. Like, those are the kinds of new problems that folks are solving, and they're being able to solve those really quickly because they're really embracing cloud native best practices. So I think that it's definitely the time of the developer. If you're really into innovating and making, creating new things and solving problems, which is typically the kinds of people that I talk to on a daily basis, then this is your time, because there's plenty of problems to go solve. And it's a really fascinating time, even from global, like, a global warming and climate change perspective. There's a lot of stuff that we're doing at IBM with Call for Code to even solve those kinds of problems. So it's interesting, the sky's the limit of what's possible. And it's really interesting to see the kinds of ideas that pop up, because, we're dealing with some pretty serious issues.
Yeah, it really makes a lot of space for innovation and other experimentation. So what kind of things have you seen over the past year or so?
Yeah, so in the past year, going remote has been a interesting challenge. It's been a really fun shift towards remote working, and a lot of different algorithms and things are being implemented due to that. We're trying to adapt to things like ordering food from home. We're trying to adapt towards better pricing models for our shipping issues that we've had, toilet paper, things like that, right? So inventory management. And all of that is enabled through the cloud. We got to move towards hosting our services in a more deployable, quicker format. And so that's something that we've been trying to do at Echo to make sure that we can really move towards deploying products as the business asks for them.
Yeah, excellent. You really want to get ahead of stuff. Mark, you worked with a lot of databases and stuff, and we know that it was sort of a trailing sort of set of applications that folks have been more hesitant to move to the cloud. But what are you seeing, and what do you find are the biggest benefits for migrating more and more things onto a cloud platform provider?
Sure. Well, as the guy said, innovation is definitely the key thing I've seen happening. And not surprisingly, the biggest space I've seen that in is health tech, obviously. I've had so many people reach out with innovative solutions for, just all around health tech, like taking your doctor's appointment in the car. Another client was doing prenatal checkups at home, this kind of thing. So I've seen a big shift and, huge innovation in those areas. And of course, with it comes moving data to the cloud. So the other big thing I've seen is compliance, and high trust and HIPAA are the things that we're really seeing. And that's become a big area now in cloud. And that's something, it's funny, when I used to work in investment banking, it was great in the early days. Then compliance came in and it bogged it down. And I escaped to the cloud, and I was compliance free for a few years, but it's here again. So embracing it this time. But yeah, they're the two big areas, health tech and compliance.
Yeah, excellent. And how does that, how are folks using it to their benefit? Like, is it really just access to more resources? Is it looking at things a different way? What do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, with the cloud, it's just the speed to market, the agility that you're provided with. I always like to say that when, in old school traditional data centers, if someone came to us and said, hey, we want to build a new application, it would take weeks, sometimes months, to go through all the processes of purchase orders, buying stuff, racking, stacking, and it was a nightmare. Yet you can do all that in a couple of minutes in the cloud. So, and if you get it wrong, tear it down and start again. So yeah, the cloud is just offering people the ability to really go for it and make mistakes and try things they never would have dreamed of trying 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Brianna, what do you see? You have the view from the IBM side. You have a lot of different places where and industries that IBM touches. What do you see across industries that what are the biggest benefits there for cloud migrations?
I think I have to add on to what Mark said about compliance. I think that it sounds a little counterintuitive, but I think that there's a lot of innovation happening at the compliance area. And what I find, with IBM, we actually announced a cloud for financial services, which is essentially the IBM cloud, but it's specific services that have a higher level of control and compliance that meet to, common financial compliance and secure controls. And what I think is really fascinating is, when we first announced this, I assumed that only the financial industry would really be interested in an offering like this. And what I found is that, every industry is really trading money. So they want to keep that money safe and secure. So every industry is always like, oh, when can I get those, those cloud controls as well? And so I think that that's really interesting, and working with some of the regulatory agencies to say, all right, we understand these controls, like what's possible to still, be, compliant, but also be able to innovate faster, and like really starting to kind of change what's possible in a lot of these regulated industries. I think that that's really, it sounds like, counterintuitive, but there's a lot there that we can kind of rethink so that you can still have that data security. Maybe that means, like some of the things I'm working on, maybe that means your data has to stay in a specific country so that it's compliant. Where we can distribute our IBM cloud to that location in a country, maybe that data needs to never leave that country. And then, maybe we need to set up things where we never see our clients' data, and how does that work? And, having those security and controls in place is so key. So I think that I have to agree with Mark. I mean, that's really a big trend that I've seen is, doubling down on compliance and controls.
That is super interesting, and a big change from where things were in the early days of cloud platforms, where that was, sort of the things you didn't touch were the things that were heavily compliant, whatever. Phil, anything that you've seen that you'd like to add to that one?
Yeah, sure. So, the cloud is also, it can be a playground of sorts. It can also be an extremely secure and compliant location. And, security is super important. I think that, the compliance can be built in, but, if you don't have a secure network and you're not able to control what you have, we've all seen like, oops, I published patient information, the HIPAA compliance or whatnot. And that is a big problem. Now, if you implement your cloud strategy properly, it will not be so hard. And that's where you really need to understand the system that you're working with, working with cloud experts. That involves things like hiring the right people that understand what they're doing, and or working with the right, consultants or whoever you can to really implement your strategy. Because if you don't implement it correctly, then you're just really setting yourself up for a lot of gaps, because there's certain things that are automatically public, for instance, in some cloud providers. And so you got to be careful with that. But security first, the DevSecOps, that's very important. I think that's sort of changed over the past few years, as Mark and Brianna have mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a follow-up to that, like thinking about, migration methodologies, best practices, when you're looking at cloud migration and looking at platforms and providers and other services that you're looking to buy, in addition to security, what other kinds of criteria do you consider?
So from our standpoint, in addition to security for our cloud migration choices, we also consider ease of use, cost, even just the ability for developers to do what they need to do, because the engineers are the ones creating the things that we are going to provide as a product to the business. In any sense, any IT shop is going to be doing that. And so, how easy is the particular platform to work with? Does it work with our systems? Do we have the knowledge to be able to implement, right? So just because something sounds cool, if people don't know how to use it, then that's an issue. So that's the things that there's a lot of points that you want to look at, like a checklist almost. But the biggest things are the understanding and just the ability to get the job done. Because you can say, yeah, I'd love to migrate and, pay for the product and get the licenses and all of that, but then it just sits there empty because no one knows how to do what they need to do. So
yeah, absolutely. Brianna, what do you see from the vendor side there? What are folks telling you that they're looking for in a cloud?
I think I'd have to agree, the user experience. I think having a consistent platform so that it's a little bit easier, because it can be a very daunting task to migrate, workloads to the cloud. And if you have a consistent platform, that makes it that much easier. And then you can kind of make a choice on, okay, what applications make the most sense, or what part of an application makes the most sense to, migrate first. And I think you want to look for situations or environments where you can be in the driver's seat in terms of the flexibility. Like you're not, tethered to a specific way of doing that. You have the maximum flexibility, so you can move when it makes sense for you, not based on, the parameters of a subscription or, whatever it might be. But I think one thing that's often overlooked, and this is where I think it's interesting coming from the oldest technology company, I honestly try to tell people it's not just about technology, it's also about culture. And so as you're doing that migration, really think about it's a great opportunity to kind of start with a clean slate. And so maybe it's time to reevaluate some of the processes that you have. Are they outdated? Or maybe the tools that you're using, are they really going to support, a cloud native, rate and pace? Because now you're probably going to move to a continuous delivery model where you're going to be pushing code every single day, every hour, maybe that means you need to work differently, and maybe you need to, organize your teams a little bit differently. And I find that in really strong organizations that are able to, make this transformation, it often comes from the ground up because the developers aren't really confused about how to work together. And if you can kind of get out of their way and let them, organize with their design teams and their, product teams, I think that builds really strong teams and the right culture to make these transformations really successful. And then once you've done, you've kind of cleaned up your own house, then you can, pivot and really focus on the problem at hand. And I assume that's trying to, reach, help your clients, right? And so how are you able to do that effectively? But it really helps if you can kind of regroup and make sure that you're really taking a good look at, how you're doing things, the process, even the culture, and make sure that you're kind of setting up the team for success with, transformation and new ideas, and letting those new ideas kind of bubble to the top.
Yeah, excellent. It can be really an opportunity to greenfield across the board with all kinds of like you say, components of how you work and how the team operates and all those kinds of things. Mark, what kind of methodologies do you use when you're working with customers, trying to figure out which pieces to migrate to the cloud, which provider to choose? How does that all fall together for you?
Well, I mean, there's a very short answer, and that would be basically anything that you're not going to decommission. Anything that you're going to get a benefit if you move anything to the cloud. It may be cost, it may be flexibility, it may be reliability. But another thing to look at would be your problem workloads. Whenever a new client wants to migrate to the cloud, I would say take a look and say, okay, what's causing you the most headaches right now? That's probably the first thing we want to get over there. And then you can look at, then the longer answer comes in, and you could look at all the different ways you can move stuff to the cloud. Are you going to lift and shift? Are you going to rehost? Are you going to re-architect? But yeah, so the short answer is basically anything is good, but take the problem applications, and then you can really get involved and have the fun stuff and re-architect to take advantage of what the cloud actually offers. And that's where you have to throw your old thinking out the window and take advantage. See where you go. It's incredible some of the stuff you can create now.
For folks in the audience who maybe aren't sure which kind of problems would constitute the good ones there, what kind of things would you be looking at? Are you looking at things that are on older platforms? Are you looking for things that are troublesome, or just anything that's noisy? Or what do you find there?
If you've got that server that keeps crashing, you've got reliability issues, or you're running out of storage. I mean, capacity planning goes out the window in the cloud. It's not a problem. You don't even think about it anymore. So stuff like that. If you're running out of space, you're running out of resource. It's a legacy application, your data center is expensive, things like that. So they're the kind of the problem workloads, the ones that most of your team is spending all their time fixing and firefighting. Get those moved over to the cloud where there's some reliability, and you can, make your life easier in the long run. So I think a lot of my clients, they move to the cloud just to try and get rid of the 3 a.m. wake up calls, and invariably that works.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Phil, what do you see with things moving on to the cloud?
Yeah, so I think that, the cloud, actually, I just saw a really good question in chat that maybe applies. So, a lot of organizations bite off too much. And so you can't just go to your stakeholders and say, hey, let's move everything all at once to the cloud. Because generally, organizations are, more than 15, 20 years old. And so they just have a lot of underlying stuff. And so if you say, yeah, let's move all of that at once, that's a lot of work, that could be years of work actually. So I like what Mark said, pick the problem child applications, the things that are difficult, especially the things that you want to move quickly on, and move them to the cloud, move them to an SaaS platform. That's the most important thing. Also, you have to understand that the cloud is many things. It's really a data center. It also provides, so that's infrastructure as a service. It also provides platform as a service and applications or software as a service. And so you have to sort of pick what you're going to do, because there's different experts for different areas. If you do all three, or try to say, okay, yeah, let's do lift and shift, but we're definitely going to do software as a service, you're doing too much. So pick one thing at a time, strategize, look at the cost. Infrastructure as a service is always more expensive than software as a service. So if you have a problem application that you can maybe move over and use software as a service, great. You're going to basically have no cost, and it's a great way to start. That's how I like to get started in cloud migrations. And then you sort of evolve from there, do more and more as your organization gains experience. But that's an opinion. There's different opinions out there, I'm sure.
Awesome. Let's get an opinion from Brianna. We'll dig a little bit more into lift and shift and refactor and any of these kinds of lessons that you've seen.
Yeah, I think that was a great perspective. Sometimes what I, advocate for is, especially if you're skilling up and you're kind of making some first initial choices, is to maybe start with an application that is client facing. So, maybe it's just a microservice that is client facing. And then, maybe there's a reason why it makes sense for that particular microservice to be in a cloud environment. And so maybe you want to, rapidly, update that. Maybe it needs more features and functions, pushed on a daily basis. So I think if you start with a client-facing application, then that starts to give you some knowledge, right? So then you have a base understanding of, okay, this is what's possible. We're starting to transform how we do things. We've got maybe a new continuous delivery model. We're starting to change our culture and the tools that we use. What makes sense to move next? And maybe that there might be data that would make more sense to be in a specific location. So you might want to move that next. But it starts to, give you an idea for, or maybe you want dev test in the cloud. So it starts to give you a path for, what makes the most sense for your organization. And to be honest, I've never seen two organizations have the same path. It's not normal to have the same path. So everybody's got their own unique situation. And so I think, starting, just kind of jumping in with the client-facing app and then going from there sometimes gives you a clue to what your, custom path to the cloud might be.
Yeah, excellent. Mark, anything to add? Anything about lift and shift versus refactor, rebuild?
I agree with what the guys say, but Phil talked on, IIS platform as a service and all that stuff. Yeah, it's definitely, if moving to a software as a service is, if you can ever do that, then it's the right thing to do. I totally agree with Phil there. It's not so good for my business because that means I don't get any work, but it does make the most sense if there's a service out there that does what you need it to do. Why are you doing it? Why are you managing it? But yeah, it's just investigate all the options and and speak to someone who knows what they're doing, because the platform as a service options that are out there from the cloud providers are really, really good. I used to be a database admin. If say RDS or Azure SQL existed back in the early 2000s, I wouldn't have had a job. So it's they're that good. So yeah, take advantage of what's out there and reduce your workload.
Yeah, and that helps too, like figure out when is a good time to sort of flip to, like you say, the services that are built into your platform of choice may be better than what you're running on premise now anyway, not just for databases, but for all kinds of things. Every time you turn around, there's a new service available in some of these platforms. It seems amazing. So yeah, definitely. So as you're picking these and thinking about the solutions that you're looking for, a lot of folks start to ask if there's, a good place for, say, a hybrid environment, or working in multiple clouds, or dealing with their applications across lots of cloud providers. Phil, do you have anything you've seen there that works better, or things to watch out for, good practices for hybrid and multi-cloud environments?
Yeah, generally I see hybrid implemented for cost savings. So, there's different approaches, right? But if I'm going to host, as Mark mentioned, a big database, so say it's like 15 terabytes or whatever petabytes, that's where the cloud gets a little expensive. You got bandwidth, you have the data storage, and so you got to account for all of that. The things that are generally cheaper are the application software as a service stuff, the platform things, those tend to be fairly affordable. So you do have to look at all of that as you're designing your cloud strategy. Long term, if you can maybe scope down those heavy hitters, then great. But if you're doing a lift and shift, you might be surprised, like, oh, okay, to host the things that I have, maybe I should, get rid of some of the data things there. And so that's generally why people do a hybrid, at least at first, because they're like, oh, I can't afford to, move all of this stuff right now, but I can put some of the, as Brianna mentioned, the customer facing applications, things that might make sense to put closer to the customer. For instance, front end sitting in a CDN, content delivery network system is always good, making sure that the applications are low latency and you can deliver quickly. That's awesome. Then you kind of keep the bulkier, enterprise legacy stuff or ERP systems in-house. And then, but that's one way to do it. If you can afford it, then the cloud has amazing options for those heavy hitters. I mean, the best. So if you're a bigger organization that's really interested in moving in that direction, and maybe you lost some of your on-prem talent, maybe they don't know how to operate the systems you have anymore. You bring in a consulting company or something, you just move it, because that's where the cutting edge people are. They're in the cloud. So, that's where you can get the expertise now.
Definitely. And thinking along those lines, like Brianna, this is kind of where your stuff kind of plays. Would you like to share that with us a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. I feel like this is a whole other hour-long topic, but this is absolutely where this is IBM at its best. It's hybrid and multi-cloud, and what you're seeing is a major shift. I think to what the other panelists mentioned is like a major pivot to as a service across the board. But now what we're also seeing is a lot of our clients come to us and say, look, I need as a service, but I need it on-prem because, as someone else mentioned, it's too expensive to move right now. It's too cumbersome to move, or it could be to the points earlier about compliance or regulation. They can't move it because, it has to stay in a specific country. And so, but they want to be able to consume, cloud services. And we actually had one client say that they estimate that they're actually spending $1 billion a year just managing software on-prem. And so if they can offload that, and then it's typically not something that most developers really want to do. It's just like manage software. They want to go invent things. So if you can shift those resources to higher value opportunities, then all of a sudden then that enterprise has an ability to start to really, disrupt. And they're really tapping into what, everybody wants to do the fun stuff anyway, which is really, create new client value instead of, patching and, installing software. So I think if the more we can offload those sort of chores, the more innovation happens. So that's like the on-prem story, so the hybrid story. And then I think the other multi-cloud is an interesting one too, because there may be a specific reason that you want to use a public cloud. Maybe it's too hard to move that workload right now, or maybe it's there for a specific reason and you're tapping into some native capabilities. That's fine. Most of our clients are using 5 to 9 different clouds today. So it's not about, it's not if, it's already happening, but now it's a bit of a cumbersome mess because you're having to toggle between all of these different, monitoring tools and consoles. And it becomes almost a security risk because it's hard to keep track and operate on all of these different, applications across all these different environments. So how can you simplify that, right? And have a single, platform where you can, a dashboard or single pane of glass where you can say, all right, this is running there. This is, kind of a command center, if you will. So you can start to get a hold of these things because you already know it's happening, right? And I think the more you can just kind of come to terms with the application sprawl that exists in your organization and sort of tackle that is better, because you're probably already using multiple clouds, whether you like it or not. And now it's like, all right, how am I going to manage this in a way that's going to propel us forward? And typically, if you can find some consistency across on-prem and multiple clouds, that's where the real automation happens, because then you can say, all right, we've got these consistent environments. Now we can build custom automation on top. And that's where the real innovation that I see happens.
Excellent. Yeah, there's so many of the platforms provide so many additional tools, like figuring out which pieces you want to use where is like a whole other study and possibilities. Mark, what kind of things do you see there with helping folks get onto these different platforms?
Well, regarding the hybrid, it's exactly what Phil and Brianna just said, cost and the main thing is compliance. I had a client that we built this amazing cloud software as a service. And then their huge client came along and said, no, it can't run in the cloud. We want our data locally. So then you're looking at the hybrid, so AWS Outposts or, the offerings from IBM or Azure. So it's a lot of it comes down to cost and compliance. It's the same story over and over again, really. I haven't really got anything else to add on that topic.
Yeah. Do you see anything about, how organizations are managing or, maintaining the consumption level, the way different teams are maybe using different parts of the platform and how that works when you're thinking about how much it costs overall?
Yeah. Well, the management of it is the hardest part. It's kind of a paradox that I think the best feature of the cloud is also the worst feature, because people come in and they just go crazy. It's like I like to say that the cloud is like a cruise ship buffet. People just go in and just take whatever they can. And I'm as guilty as anyone when it comes to a cruise ship buffet. But it's being able to manage that is very hard. You have to put some governance in place. You have to tag everything so you know who owns it. You have to put cost allocation tags in so you know which department is generating the cost. But it's difficult, I'm not going to lie. I've logged into some new client sites accounts and they've just been blown away. It's pure gluttony, it really is. But trying to get control. I mean, you have control of it at the moment in the traditional data center, so it's just refocusing, and there's plenty of applications out there that can help you now.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, have you seen anything interesting in that space for keeping an eye on things?
In terms of monitoring and single planet, yeah, I would say that it is difficult to deal with, especially if you have multi-cloud or hybrid. There is sprawl right now. So I think there are solutions that are sort of evolving at the moment. I've used a few different kinds and implemented different ones, but there's no perfect choice. So, and I think that's going to keep changing just because the popularity of various solutions is they're going up and down. And so really it needs to be evaluated on a per case basis. Some of the cloud providers can offer decent monitoring, but generally I've found third-party monitoring to be pretty good. So, tools like, Datadog, Dynatrace, lots of other vendors that are out there that connect with all of these different providers. And so, it depends on, what you can budget for. The monitoring is sort of, I would say, second. You first have to implement your cloud strategy. How are you going to get to where you need to go, and then you need to be able to monitor and see the success of your migration, right? Mm-hmm. So don't forget about that, because
that actually leads me into the next question. So in the Q&A here, we have a good question from Irini. What do companies need to evaluate to make sure the migration will be successful? Like how do you know it's during the thing? What are do you have milestones that you're looking at, and then at the end, how do you know that you're done and you're in the best place you can be?
Yeah, so I can take that one to start. again, it depends on the strategy that you have decided upon. So if you're going to start with a software as a service application, or maybe a small server or something like that, customer facing, that's up to you. So you create these milestones. There is no completion of a cloud migration, because you're going to continually evolve and use the cloud more and more. And again, it is just another form of a data center, right? So instead of you managing that on-premise stuff, now it's all managed by a provider. And so it's going to evolve with your company, and you can change it how you will. Now that does require good leadership in that space. You can't just implement a project and expect it to be done. That's not how it works. You need to hire the right people to manage that going forward. And just because you are offloading that workload to a cloud provider, yes, you're removing some of the need to maintain some of the underlying systems, which is great, but you still need that overall strategy. So just keep that in mind. It's only going to be successful if you have the right leadership in charge to do that migration. And you can either outsource that leadership and maintain that relationship with said vendor, or you can in-house it and bring in someone full-time or multiple people to really manage that project. But again, it's a long-term commitment. People make the mistake of thinking it's a short-term, the lift and shift thought process, that doesn't work. It's not a quick snap of the fingers. It's a methodology change.
It absolutely is. And you will reap more rewards by taking your time and doing it well. Brianna, what are your thoughts on, the evaluating the whole process for success?
Oh, I think this is kind of the best part for me, because I'm a product person. So the sort of the designing how you're going to go do it is the most fun. And so, at IBM, we do something called design thinking, and we have a very specific process that we actually use with our clients in the IBM Cloud Garage. But essentially what it is a 3-day workshop where you bring in all your stakeholders and you fight it out a little bit on what is that MVP. And then at the end, you produce hills. And I'll tell you, it's an interesting, psychological thing, because nobody wants to give up 3 days of their life to planning because they think it's a waste. But I've never had a situation where that hasn't paid off in dividends, because if you can get everybody to agree, which is the hardest thing, right? That is huge. And then you never have to talk about it again. And then you all agree and say, look, this is what we agreed. Remember those, we had those great arguments. And then, over tacos or whatever it is. And then you agree, and then you move forward. And then when everybody agrees, you can just, no one's confused about the execution. And I think that is really key. And if you can create some very quantifiable hills where you can kind of measure your progress and say, all right, this is the target that we're going to go hit, then allows everybody to move so much faster. And you just have so much autonomy. And I think for team building too, if you can come together with all the stakeholders and say, all right, let's listen to everybody's point of view, because everybody's here with a specific view of how this should work and what the outcome should be. And they're not here because, they don't have great ideas. They have amazing ideas. So if you can listen and be really empathetic through that process and say, all right, I've heard what we need to go do. This is the output. I think that's a very special thing. And that's what I love about being a product person. And if you can do that well, and if you have the right facilitation, usually, actually, I do that with my own teams, and I have at IBM, obviously, we have some resources. So I use my design facilitators, but I try to find someone I've never spoken to before that doesn't know me from anyone. And so usually I try to make sure that person is going to be really hard on us. And so, give us a little bit of a hard time and make sure that we stay on task. And so they don't know us and we're not friends or anything, so that they don't, give us an easy time. And if you can really fight it out and have a good planning session, then the rest is going to be successful.
That's super interesting. Mark, do you fight it out with folks on some of these projects?
Yeah, there's always some resistance to change. I saw someone ask a question just a second ago about, how do you hire for the cloud? And, the problem we find is when you migrate people to the cloud, there is some resistance from people in the room, the die-hard IT people who are used to doing it their way, and, the job security thing kicks in. But as for managing the projects, we always just try and define some SLAs and say, okay, this is what you want it to look like and what your customers need to have in place when this gets moved to the cloud, and then just set up processes and monitoring and, you know, alerting to make sure that you're meeting these targets. You know, and the cloud does make that very easy. I guarantee that there's probably 1,000 or 10,000 more metrics you can capture than you currently are, you know, to make sure that everything is working as it should. Yeah, and take your time. That's like as Phil said, these things do take. It would probably take as long to get in the cloud as it would to migrate to another traditional data center. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's follow up with the question that was in here, Mark. Like, do you give recommendations to your customers about, you know, should they be hiring people? Should they be retraining people? Are we looking at a different skill set for the migration and then the maintenance process? Is there, you know, what does that end up looking like for organizations that are just embarking on this process?
We typically find that people want to, you know, just retrain their existing staff. And, you know, I mean, and a good example of this is when I worked in banking, you know, I knew nothing about networks. Networks were a total mystery to me. Yet in the cloud, I consider myself a bit of an expert, you know, so they do dumb things down to a certain degree. So, you know, if you're a competent person in IT, you know, you can be more than competent in the cloud, but it's a learning curve. And especially as Brianna said, if you know, have a company that has 5 to 9 clouds, then it's very difficult to be good at, you know, more than 2 or 3 clouds. You know, my plan initially was to be a master of all. You know, I now focus on AWS because it's you know, I'm not quite smart enough for that. But yeah, training, we can, you know, what we typically do is we'll help people, we'll handhold them, we'll build it for them, then we'll talk them through what we built. And they'll pick it up from there. You know, I mean, it's exciting. It's so much more fun. I think when people get involved with it and realize what they can do, it's, you know, it's way more interesting than the traditional data center. So yeah, you can just, if you've got good staff now, then, you know, just train them up, give them all the training they need.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot more cool toys in the cloud than like a lot of organizations are going to buy for themselves. So there's opportunities for lots of different playing around. So what kind of things have you seen? Like you've mentioned a couple of times about, you know, getting the right people on board. Have you taken the hiring path, or you brought in contractors? What kind of things do you see?
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting question. It depends on the organization's number one philosophy, number two budget, right? So if you have the ability to bring in full-time people that understand the cloud and you know, you're able to vet those people properly, then great. If you don't have that confidence, then I do recommend, you know, hiring maybe an outside vendor that knows what they're doing, and then holding them to that, and over time establishing that internal team that can manage the cloud, because, you know, it really is tough to just sort of convert. You know, it's a lot of knowledge. It takes some time. You might have people that are willing to learn, and that's where then you dabble in the cloud for a little bit. You give them, you know, 6 months to a year to spin up a small application or something, learn all of the ins and outs of it, and then sort of plan a bigger migration. So that's your timeline. That's how you know, decide to do things. If you think it's super important, you know, you maybe have like a billing cycle coming up for your in-house data center, and you're like, we really don't want to commit to this again, we'd like to move, then you're going to have to spend some money on consulting and hire up and develop all that with that partner. But if you have time, you know, I do think it's worth it. You know, developing that in-house talent and being able to manage your cloud yourself is very rewarding, and it can definitely result in some better decisions being made, because when you do outsource, you end up really offloading a lot of those decisions and the expertise to that partner. You have to trust them. And so, you know, there are mistakes that are made, right? So you do have to think about that cost too.
They're learning opportunities.
Yes.
Brianna, anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting in technology. I think that it's really hard to be successful in technology unless you're a lifelong learner. So in my experience, it's not that folks can't learn, because they can, and they're used to learning because there's always something new coming out. And it's actually, I think I've learned so much from some of the older developers, because I watch how many different technologies they just consume without a second thought. They're just so comfortable with learning new things. And I think that's really a cool trait that I've tried to emulate in my own career. But so I don't think that it's not that folks can't learn, because that's really what you do in tech. It's every single day you're learning something new. But I do think it does take time. And, so sometimes there's a little bit of resistance, but it's not because they can't learn. It's just, it takes some time, and maybe they don't feel like they have that time. And sometimes I'll see kind of factions within an enterprise where you've got, one organization that's really big on, AWS, another one that's really big on, Azure or IBM Cloud. And then, they're kind of competing. So it's kind of interesting how that happens sometimes. And then it sort of becomes like, what organization can become, successful first? So sometimes I see that, and you can't help but be empathetic, because like those teams have learned those tools, and, it's not that they can't learn something else, it just takes time. And so I think the easier we can make it across for folks to kind of use the tools that they want to use, the better. And I think that's really my goal, is to, figure out ways that folks can, use the tools that they want to use, and requires the minimal amount of, learning something new. Not because that's not possible, it just takes time.
Yeah, definitely. So looking at some of the audience questions here, Gaurav wants to know, I was wondering about your thoughts on executing cutover strategies. That's an interesting question during a cloud migration. Do you have a best practice for, say, the final phase of the project, a cutover when migrating on premises to cloud? Phil, you're nodding. What do you think there?
Yeah, so figuring out the final or the success goals, if you will, of your project, depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? So the cloud is a data center with lots of features, and it allows you to either architect new applications or move existing ones. So if you think that, okay, I need to move, in this case, my data warehouse, then you would decide, all right, in the final phase, maybe we're going to cut over, we're going to, change our load balancer and point at the new one. The technologies are still the same in terms of how the applications themselves will work. So really, that's up to you to decide, what the success looks like. You do want to make sure that it works for your stakeholders and customers. I think that's the biggest thing. So,
Mark, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, well, you mentioned data warehouse. One of the biggest complexities to the cloud is getting the data in there in the first place, because that can be the longest part of a migration, and especially if you need it in real time. So again, you have to plan. There are solutions out there, and the cloud has come up with some really cool stuff. AWS, for example, has like a database migration service where you can replicate any database to any database. Well, in theory, anyway. So you can cut over in real time without having to copy massive amounts of data. And there's even a articulated truck called a snowmobile, which you can drive to your data center, plug it in, and upload terabytes of data, and then it drives off to the nearest Amazon data center to upload it for you. So you just have to plan. Basically, there is a solution for everything. It's just finding the right one, and working out which cloud provider will give you the best options for your platforms.
Yeah, excellent. So Derek's got a little note here for us. He says, don't forget cloud has different patterns than the data center. When we're talking about training and the need to train new patterns and those kinds of things, kind of leads us into our last set of questions about, thinking about cloud culture and those kinds of things. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's dig into that a little bit. So thinking about, the migration from the way we've always done things, and it's always been that way, and like this sort of ingrained patterns, and the future of very flexible and very, in some ways very transient technologies, and a very fast moving, portfolio of things that are available. Like that takes a lot of stretching for the way people think about all of their projects. So what kinds of things do you advise folks on? Brianna, let's start with you there.
Yeah, I think that, really what we're seeing, data and where it lives is really important. And we already kind of talked about compliance and location. But then I think now data is only so valuable. Now it's all about machine learning, and how can you really apply analytics to that data and really distill the best parts. And so I think that's where the strategy has to really be focused on, what's the outcome that you're trying to drive? And how do you achieve that outcome? Maybe it's, maybe you need to worry about latency, and maybe your data and your analytics need to live in the same environment. And so I think that it's very custom to the organization, but it's really, I think it's about planning outcomes and then how do you want to achieve those outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the culture thing is interesting. I mean, you just have to throw out the old way of thinking. It's and I mean, there's good documentation out there. For example, AWS has the 5 pillars, well-architected framework. You know, you have to keep reading. You have to be certified. You know, well, you don't have to be certified, but it does help to be certified, and just keep abreast of what's going on out there. I mean, it's the rate of change is ludicrous. I mean, I've literally in some projects we've rolled out a solution only to find at the end of the project a better solution has already been developed and pushed out, and then you're like, oh, it's like painting a bridge. You know, you get to one end and start again. So yeah, just be open-minded. I mean, it's easy to say, but I really enjoy the fact that, you know, this is how it's been done. You'd say, well, let's forget about it. Let's have a blank piece of paper and really start from scratch. And you can really, I mean, what's the expression? There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. There's like 1,000 ways to build something in the cloud. It's so yeah, just embrace what it offers, and speak to experts as well. I mean, it's impossible to pick this up from the start if you've never looked at the cloud.
Yeah, Phil, anything to add there?
Yeah, you know, there's always the mentality of like, this is how it used to be done or always has been done, and then what we're doing in the future. You know, the cloud itself is a resource to get things done faster. And so what you need is a business and corporate leaders that buy into IT, that is willing to adopt change and move faster. You know, that has to be their goal. And so, you know, one of the jobs, as at least from an IT perspective or from a business leader trying to argue for this, is, you know, business needs to evolve in order to compete in the modern world. You know, we're always hearing about the latest and greatest technologies. And, you know, even if you think I don't need to adopt that technology right now, or, you know, I do think that at some point my business needs to do this or that, but we don't need to do it right now because we're fine. Probably not a great idea. And so that's the whole mentality that needs to change. And cloud fits into that by supporting the people that are developing those new features and ideas in IT and in other areas even. So that's where cloud culture then can come into play. You know, ask about it and say, hey, we really want to move forward quickly. So have we thought about the cloud? And then, you know, IT people are usually totally willing to support that. Sometimes they're not. And if they're not, then I think that's a mistake. So, you know, definitely needs to come from the people willing to write that check, I think, first.
Yeah, absolutely. Strong leadership and a strong sense of purpose and goals, really important for any of these kinds of shifts that encompass not just your technology platforms, but also the culture and, like you say, the way you're going to work and how fast you're going to accomplish things. And all of that can be so disruptive if it's not done well from the leadership perspective. So we're just about to the end of time here. Let's go to some more Q&A from the audience. So from Billy here, does the panel see the cost spent on cloud deployments getting out of hand? $sign. Brianna, anything that you'd like to say there about, you know, how do you manage your costs?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The cloud resources keep going down in price, but it's easy to go astray. And so it's interesting how, you know, it's kind of a balance. I think we were talking about culture earlier. I think that, you know, I'm really a big proponent of having a bottoms up strategy in terms of, you know, what process and tools we're going to use. But you have to be a little bit careful, because if everybody is doing something different, that's super inefficient. And so there has to be some consistency across organizations, or things do get a little bit out of hand. So it's a little bit of a balance, because you want people to be really, you want them to embrace the tools and process. But if everyone in the organization has a different idea of how to solve the problem, then that does, you know, equate to wasted dollars. And you see that every once in a while, where, you know, an organization may have gotten out of control, and like every developer has their own credit card to spend and they're doing things differently. So, so I think that, you know, having a little bit of a lightweight strategy that then everybody can kind of plug into, I think is really good in terms of keeping that cost in a range that, isn't gonna, alarm you in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, basically, from a cost perspective, like Brianna said, it's easy to manage the cost, but it can get out of hand if you let your engineers just like go and do whatever they want. So it's a mix. You can establish limits on your accounts and things like that for sure. You do need to have consensus within your organization on what kind of technologies you're going to use, so that we can decide, hey, is this affordable or not? You could talk about a data warehouse. Those are very expensive. Are we willing to deal with that? What data limits are we going to allow? And, bandwidth are we going to consume? So, there's discussions that need to be had, and that's where the expertise needs to come into play, because if you don't have it, you're going to miss it. And then you may or may not trust an outside, vendor. And, if you do trust them, great, but sometimes that can come with its own price tag. So there are decisions that need to be made in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. Mark, is there anything that you counsel your customers on in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of cost reviews. But firstly, make sure you're taking advantage of the discounts available. The cloud, it is there. They don't publicize it particularly well for obvious reasons. But, there are big discounts to be made available, and hold periodic reviews. Whenever we do a review for a client, it's always at least 20% saving. It's usually a lot more than that. So there's so much wastage out there. So yeah, schedule periodic reviews. There's even third-party tools out there that you can plug into your account, and it will give you a good idea of what's going on.
Yeah, it's really one of those places where the expertise really shows its value. Is knowing exactly where to find those hidden costs and things that get provisioned to the wrong availability zone or the wrong region or whatever the case might be there. So I have another question in the chat here. We've talked a bit about compliance at the very beginning of the chat, but thinking from more like a security perspective, what should be the main concern for security practitioners, security-minded folks when looking at a cloud migration? Phil, you want to kick that one off?
Sure. So security is super important, especially in the cloud, because there are easy options to make something public or be like, oops, I revealed my data. And so that's where you need that expertise, that security built into your DevOps and continuous delivery processes. Reviews, code reviews are super important. You can automate everything in the cloud. You can write it in lots of different formats. The ones that I'm thinking of are AWS. They have their own. I'm sure IBM does as well. And so looking at all of those different vendors and their advised security practices, definitely dig into that as you work with them, because they offer great options for securing your resources and also the review of that security practice. So, but it has to be important to your engineers and your consultants. They have to be sort of on the hook for that security, because like I said, it's built into some of these products, and so they have to implement it.
Yeah, absolutely. Brianna, what do you see in this space? Do people ask you specifically for advice here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I would say the best way, some of the internal products I've built, as well as, advising my, clients, is, get the CISO on board early on. That's probably the most important thing is, because in every industry is different. Every, enterprise has some different, security postures. And so you want to make sure that the CISO is on board, and that you need to make sure that if there's any adjustments that need to be made, that you can do that and you're aware of those early on. And I think that that's one of those early on things that you need to go tackle. So, as you're designing your, your sprints and you're kind of designing your hills, you want to make sure that you haven't forgotten about the CISO. I think that they have to be a huge stakeholder in your project, and you got to make sure that they're looking over and giving you some guidance on your path forward.
Excellent. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brianna and Phil said. It's the good thing about the cloud is they take care of half the stuff for you. So there's a shared responsibility model, so you are actually lessening what you have to look after. But it's incredibly easy to make stuff public. So yeah, schedule reviews, get a penetration test, and and listen to, as much as we hate it, listen to the security people out there.
We don't hate it. They're just a little grumpy.
Well, I mean, I ended up getting my AWS security certification last year, so you know, I can hate myself. So.
Oh, that's equal opportunity there. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're just about at time here, so thanks so much for joining us, and here's Emma back.
Yeah, hi. What a great discussion, you guys. We went right up to the last minute. I wish we could keep going. You guys have such incredible insights, and I really enjoyed learning from you guys. I'm sure everyone else did as well. So thank you so much for participating, and thank you everyone who tuned in today. Today's webinar will also be available on demand after we're done here. You'll receive it in an email so you can review. If you want to go back, you missed anything, I'm sure you want to dig into some golden nuggets that were in that conversation. And that's all for today. Thank you everyone for joining, and we will see you next time. Bye guys.